Jig night. Just like that. Here we go, folks. Back at it. Let's go, folks. Jig night. Welcome to Jig Squad. If you're new here, I'm Mike Murphy, otherwise known as Cuda or Barracuda. We talk jigs, and tonight I have a guy on that I've been excited to kind of get into, diversify. I want to move away from just doing bass guys. So like last week we had bucktail guys from the East Coast. Now we're going to be talking to a very unique designer that is going to have a fantastic discussion with us tonight on a lot of different things. I love Nick's company profile. I love what he does, and I love everything that he's all about. I'll do a quick little holler out. I said hi to some of you guys in chat already, but Emerita, Andrew, Sean, George Val, Michael Bradley, Larry Hadley, Chris Hill, Gators. What's happening, bud? Dorkfish, Dave. Who else we got? If I miss you, Jay was in early tonight, and I'm sure we'll have more coming as we go. Darius, Todd Bennett, Darkman, Chris Hill. What's happening, everybody? So my guest tonight is Jig Geek, and it's as simple as that. It's just Jig Geek. And as we're talking tonight, you guys, I want you to jump on the website for Jig Geek, and so you can look and get an idea of some of the things that Nick has. But he's an awesome designer, and I'm excited to talk about a couple things tonight. So I'm going to get him in. Nick, what's happening,
awesome.
buddy? Welcome to Jig
How's
Squad.
it going?
Good, buddy. Good. Excited to have you on. So the standard stuff always when we start, I'm sure we'll get into some cool discussion. But so tell people about you a little bit, your kind of history of, you've been fishing probably for a portion of your life, right? As most of us have. But then you became Jig Geek. And so how did this all come about? How did you get into the company game and the jig making game? And how long has that been going on? And what was that experience like for you when you got going here? Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, let's get into it. So been fishing pretty much my entire life. Dad got me out in the river and the lake when I was really small. So just got hooked on it instantly. No pun intended there.
Literally,
but
right?
Yeah, just been fishing ever since a little guy. And I come from a mechanical engineering background. So well versed in like product design, CNC mills and machining and whatnot. And it's kind of how I got started on the jig game. I was out fishing and kept losing a bunch of fish on the stuff I was getting from stores, and was like, you know what, I could put a spin on some stuff and dig into the design of it and create some products for myself. And that turned into creating a couple things and giving some stuff away to buddies or people I saw on the river that wanted to check out what I was using. And it kind of just grew from there. Cool. Yeah, it just a domino effect started and more people kept asking. And I was like, this could actually turn into something, and stuck a toe in for a little bit and then decided just to jump into the deep end and get fully into it. But
it's super cool. So you're like Vancouver area?
Yeah, Vancouver area.
Okay, so Vancouver, BC. And so a lot of your background in terms of fishing, like you mentioned rivers. So most of your fishing has been around what type of species would you say, Nick?
Salmon. So steelhead, or not steelhead, but Chinook, coho, pink, chum, and then steelhead in the winter, which is a trout. But yeah. So some big fish. I mean, tons of different varieties of fishing up here and tons of different styles, but mainly river, and then into some ocean fishing with like inshore stuff with jigs. Not so much trolling, but yeah. So mainly my fishing has been salmon. Dabble in trout every year, ice off and whatnot. And some lakes here you can twitch a jig for some massive trout, but primarily salmon. Yeah.
That's great. So one of the things, Nick, I always talk about with everyone is just the diversity of like the jig making experience, right? And so and particularly when it comes to like the different design types that are out there, but more so of the like the species that we target. So whether, like I always mention, like the East Coast striper scene, the Florida snook scene, the coho river fishermen, the smallmouth fishermen, fishing out west, it doesn't matter what it is, southern largemouth bass guys. I do think that there's a tremendous value in paying attention to other styles of species of fish that designers design for, and taking from those elements things and trying new stuff, right? And so I have to, one of my first things I got to ask. So like a twitching jig is a pretty commonplace thing for river salmon fishermen, right?
Yeah.
And so we talked about it a little bit before, but the one in which you guys, you got to check them out. So as we're talking here, you got to go see on the Jig Geek site. The link is down below in the description. But a lot of real cool twitching jigs. But the one I'm dying to talk about because I don't know enough about, and it's not even like a tying thing, but I have to ask it because it's the number one thing in my head, and no one ever gives me good answers like when I ask. So, Hoochie Jigs. Tell me what it is and what it looks like. And I want people to hear this because we've never talked about it on the show.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys can see that, but that's what it looks like. I'll show you what it looks like. I got a couple different sides. It's untied, no stinger hook. You can see that. And then it looks like the stinger on it, or a loop for the stinger. But yeah, so the idea behind it was, I mean, you'll see salmon fishermen use these in the salt all the time. Hoochie under a flasher, drop it down, and that's where they catch them on. So fish are feeding on them. They're used to seeing hoochies in the salt. So the idea behind it, I mean, a couple other companies do it, but was to bring this into the river and allow river fishermen to use a bait that is natural and known to the fish while they're upriver.
Sure.
So yeah, you don't see hoochies in the river, squid in the river swimming about, but the fish have seen it in the ocean, so they know what it is. They're used to it, and so that's kind of the idea behind it. A couple of cool things with it is a loop. So I don't know, when you toss all your jigs back into the box, I mean, over time your hooks rust out, or you want to change them up, or you want to scale down or scale up your hook based on the species you're fishing. I mean, like the coho versus Chinook. So the nice thing is, like, we'd put a loop on the end so that you could switch in whatever hook you wanted to put in the back and totally dial in that presentation to the species and size of fish you're fishing. And then the other interesting thing, I don't know if I'll show you, but the balance point on these. So I'll hold it with another, but it balances and lies perfectly flat through the eye. So when you clip that line on, you get in a perfectly balanced jig, which does a couple of cool things. So when this jig's under the water, you get, instead of the traditional like up and down movement from a twitching jig, which you're trying to elicit bites, this one actually spirals up. Okay. Which is super interesting. You just get a different pattern, a different action on the lure that I mean, when you're tossing twitching jigs all day, sometimes switching that action up just elicits a bite. But yeah, we've used these from everything from like lingcod, rockfish to salmon, Chinook, chum, steelhead. And the cool thing about them is if you're not too into twitching, you can also cast and retrieve them, and they got a pretty killer movement on them. We got guys dropping them down behind. Got one of our pro staff actually trolls them behind a little rowboat out in the ocean, and he absolutely just slams kings on them. But yeah, and that's kind of what it is. It's just a different take on a hoochie that's weighted. Cool. Trailer hook, and yeah.
It's so interesting to me because basically, I mean, it's a squid body, right? And so with varying sizes. And the thing is, like in the saltwater world, like if I was down in the Caribbean or wherever the heck I was at, or South America or anything where along Central America, and you're trolling smaller size squids and stuff like that, it's the same concept. And so, but the reality is, it's so interesting to hear, at least for me, it's so interesting to hear that this is a different application that can be used for this. And I do know that the salmon world has embraced this concept. And so I guess the point I'm making is that even past the salmon world, there's absolutely no reason why people can't be, Hellabass, Hoochie, I thought this was PG. It is, buddy, but this is Jig Squad. Nick's telling us all kinds of new interesting things. But I think using a jig that style is just it's an interesting thing, and the ability to switch out the hooks because of that back end instead of a shank on the back end of the jig. You've got like a looped metal piece, and you're putting on a metal leader or whatever you're using for your like how strong are those looped leaders that you put on there? Like what are we talking for like pound test, or are you using
Yeah, so it's a multi-strand braided wire, which does a
okay.
couple things. It allows it to move with it has good movement, so it moves with the legs. So it doesn't stick out to the side when you pull it one way, and if the fish bites the hoochie, it's not floating up and
Okay.
missing the strike. But the smaller sizes are about 50 pounds,
Okay.
and the larger sizes doubled over would be about 120 pounds.
So Nick, let me ask you a question. So I'm going down to Costa Rica this summer with the
Yep.
family. I
Yep.
mean, and if so if I have AFW wire and making things like that, am I in the ball game of being able to switch out hooks and stuff like that for something similar to that if I'm using those plastic squids and stuff?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm not.
That's the game. Like AFW wire or whatever pound, you
Yeah,
say
not not
50.
not too familiar with AWF wire, but like, yeah, I mean, a drag on a reel is what most river rods bottom out at 18 pounds.
Right.
So if you're
Right.
putting more pressure than that through that wire, I mean, like, you're gonna take out line before you break that wire.
I mean, even the saltwater world will tell you that when they talk about 22 pounds of drag, it's like you should never need 22 pounds of drag, and maybe for bigger fish. But that's, I don't know. I mean, for you guys seem to get on bigger salmon and stuff than I ever have. I mean, I've caught browns up to 20 pounds and then kings up to, Chinook up to 28, but I haven't gotten much bigger than that. And I know they all come bigger than that, So it's
Totally.
it's fun fishing. And so most of my experience with salmon and steelhead are lake run and all on the southern basin of Lake Michigan, So like our approach is a little different. But it's just interesting to hear about that. And I wanted people to hear about like what a hoochie jig is and like how you can use that. And I do think here's what I'm going to say. I think that there are extremely small versions of a hoochie jig that would be tremendously effective on Great Lakes smallmouth. And I'll leave it up to the mind of
Yeah,
other people to figure out just because it's something different. And I think it's a cool style. So you guys,
totally.
again, link is down below. And the reason I'm going to keep saying that tonight is because one, I want you to see Nick's stuff because he's got so many crazy color. He's got one color that I saw that's what is it? Slabosaurus.
Lobsaurus Rex, yeah.
I I love he's got some really cool jigs, and I want to make sure that you see them. Okay, so that's a hoochie jig. The other style of jigs, I want to know what would be the difference between what you classify, right, as a float jig compared to a twitching jig. What are the two? How would you describe the difference between those two jigs? I
Yeah,
think I could describe it, but I want somebody that knows this better than me to tell the people and watching the show.
totally. And I think like one of the main like differences between the two is just how you fish them. A lot of guys will add tails to a float jig and float it just fine. But for us, it's weight. So our float jigs are a quarter ounce and an eighth ounce, and the twitching jigs are a little bit bigger, 3/8, half. But yeah, so like from here, the biggest difference is just the profile and the tail. See if
Okay.
I can.
So you're basically on the float. You're not putting zonker strips on the back end of the floats.
Typically not.
Right.
And like sometimes, I mean, patterns for myself or whatnot, I will change it
Mhm.
up. But I find this to be more effective and mimics more of like an egg sack or another presentation that the fish are eating. Um, but yeah, so the main difference would be just the size profile in that tail as well as the legs. I find you don't need as much movement. Whereas twitching jigs, you're trying to elicit a bite, you're trying to aggravate the fish and get him mad and get him to snap at it. You're not necessarily
Sure.
mimicking a bait that they naturally see. But yeah, that's the main difference would be like the size and then just the overall profile of them. Yeah,
Cuddy obviously has some experience with your jigs because he's like, these are the best jigs on the market. Which is so you either know Cuddy or he's a customer of yours already.
yeah, he's a
Um,
customer, know him pretty good. Yeah,
that's good, man. So okay, so very interesting. So and so let me ask you a question. So
yeah.
most of your float jigs, I mean, obviously there's all different types of materials you're tying with, but a lot of your float jigs are marabou, right?
Actually,
And a
rabbit.
lot of rabbit. You're using rabbit. Okay.
Yeah, we got some. And like, there's a couple of reasons. I guess the biggest reason would be durability.
Okay.
For us. A marabou jigs, I would say, depending on the type of rabbit you have the same marabou would say the same movement or better. But
Mm-hmm.
depending on those fish, if you're fishing chum with a marabou jig, it's lasting maybe 2 fish. If you're
Mm-hmm.
fishing chum with a rabbit jig, it's going to last a lot more.
I'll,
And
I'll
that's, yep.
I'll be honest with you, Nick. I think rabbit has better movement than marabou. My own opinion. I'm a victim of probably reality that I don't get as much length out of the rabbit, obviously, but it just depends on how you're using it, right? I think a
Totally.
lot of guys like the marabou because of the length, right? That you're going to get
Yeah.
out of it. And movement's undeniably good on marabou, but guys, rabbit is supreme, right? It's amazing,
Yeah.
like
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing would be, I guess, for us is tieability and then the movement on it. Or the durability on it. It's
yeah.
just, yeah, and then most of our float jigs have like a crystal flash or some type of chenille underneath the rabbit just to help it pop and also help that rabbit stand up a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get water across it, it doesn't suck down towards the body. It stays
Okay.
a bit bigger profile. But yeah,
Very cool. So I mean, the diversity of colors that are out there are super cool. And you guys, listen, another thing for anyone watching on replay, or if you are live, the other thing is that you could find Jig Geek on Instagram as well. A lot of cool stuff. And a lot of you guys understand something. A lot of people just like using the jigs by Jig Geek, and we're going to get into that a little bit too. But let's see what else. Okay, so we got float, twitching, and
yep,
then Matt, I saw him, one of the guys in chat, South Jersey fisherman. Let me go back to this here. Matt said, I'm really interested in that pivot twitching jig. That thing looks crazy. You want to
yeah,
talk about that a little bit?
yeah. I'll talk. Let me see if I got one in front of me because I'm not sure if I grabbed one.
Yeah, so you guys, Matt picked up on this, right? And Matt saw this, and you could see this. Like if you look on the Jig Geek site, you'll get a feel for what some of these things are. But keep in mind, you guys, everything we're talking about tonight, even if this is something you haven't used for, I want you to start thinking about this in terms of, is this something I could use, and how would I use it, and why would I use it? So just because a lot of these style jigs originate in our river run type fishing methods in the coho salmon world, right? It does not mean, I'm going to tell you something. There is a world of Great Lakes fishermen or large bodied of water fishermen, northern fishermen, that will use twitching jigs that won't tell you about it. And they don't use it in the same colors as a lot of the coho and salmon guys. But what they will do is use them in the greens and olives and tans and blacks, even pinks. And you should be paying attention to it, because the rabbit strips and on the back end, or zonker strips, there's movement like nothing else. So I just tell the truth, But anyway, Nick,
Yeah,
you want to talk about that a little bit?
yeah. I'll talk about it. I don't have one in front of me, and
That's okay.
apologies,
No,
Jersey.
explain the concept. So what?
Yeah,
What?
so the concept behind it would be like that's your typical blank fixed hook. So it uses a shank similar to our Hoochie shank in it, where it has that fixed loop, and then it's from the fly fishing world, an articulated streamer or an
Yes.
articulated a fly. So then it would have a body section loop to that, and then the hook on the end. And the idea behind it is you just got multiple pivots or points of action that the jig can articulate about. So you'll get a bit more of a tail whip, or in that current, that jig wouldn't just be the rabbit tail moving, it'd be the entire body of the jig because you have those pivot points. So yeah, that was the idea behind those. Again, just offering fishermen, fisherwomen a different option in their arsenal. I mean, like everybody knows when you fish an entire day and something can go stale and you need to mix it up, and sometimes that extra movement just elicits a different strike or another bite. But yeah, that's the idea behind them, is just adding more points of articulation to a jig.
If you go on to Jig Geek site, you'll be able to see. Just look for that articulated twitching jigs. I think you have them called pivot
jig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the same. What Nick's saying, you guys, is there's world famous flies out there, like Blaine Chocolate's Game Changer and stuff like that use probably, I don't know, 4 or 5 segments of a articulated shanks that creates multiple pivot points on a jig. And it's just an extraordinary different look. And so you may not be making jigs yourself, but even if you're not, if you see things like that out there, you just have to realize that this is another movement type of jig that you might not typically have access to. And you're just educating yourself. You know what's out there, what's available to buy. If you're a jig maker, you can make them. But if you're not, there's a lot of people that watch this show that aren't. They just like hearing about these things, and you become better informed, right? All right. So I can't wait forever, because one of the things that I'm excited to talk about more than anything, you guys are always excited. Everyone who watches Jig Squad, and if you're new, hopefully you like this discussion as we get into this. But you use this Jig Squad as a resource, and if you have questions, ask them in chat, because everyone's at different levels of where we're at, right, in jig making or just jig use, and we need to learn from each other. That's the whole point of Jig Squad, right? But the thing is, even for the custom jig makers, Nick is an absolute jig geek in reality. And the thing is, I want him to talk about his coming to design his own jigs. And I'm not talking a twitching jig or a hoochie jig. I'm talking like Nick has made his custom jigs from the design element up. And so, Nick, talk about that and how that even came to be. You originally said, hey, I was tired of not having the things that I wanted out there.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah. In terms of that, I guess the biggest thing for me that I saw in the market, or problem was on the market, or I had was hooks and hook strength, especially for some of the smaller hooks that we fish. Because we'll fish a 16th ounce or an 1/8 ounce jig for,
Yep.
I mean, you could have the chance of catching a 20-pound steelhead, or I mean,
Right.
some rivers a 30-pound king, and those hooks in the market would just snap.
Right.
You lose a fish of your dreams, and that'd be the end of it. You'd go home and be like, damn, I wish I had a better jig hook. So that's kind of what got started on it, and just dove very deep into that whole design. And it took quite a while to figure out if I was going to go with a standard manufactured of a hook, whether that's Gammy or Mustad or Eagle Claw or VMC or whatnot. And there just wasn't anything that really stood out to me. So I started the process of designing my own hook, from the wire thickness to the shape of the point, to the cone point, to the sickle design. And then got pretty deep into the engineering behind it. And there's a set of equations for the point of a hook and the thickness of the wire that determines how much penetration you can get, and really geeked out on that. So like the finished product was a hook that would have super, super good penetration, but also be strong enough to pull in those big fish and not snap or bend out.
It's so interesting, right, guys? So there's a couple things I want you to think about as we kind of continue on in this conversation. And obviously, if you have thoughts yourself or things in chat, throw them in there. But you got to understand a couple of things. Most of the time I say this when I'm talking to the bass world, but this is everyone. The thicker your hook, the more force it requires for you to penetrate the mouth of that fish. Yeah. And so I'm telling you, if you are a light line fisherman and you want this crazy oversized hook, I'm going to tell one little comment about this. I know somebody in the industry, and I will never, I'm not a name dropper. I don't do it. I know somebody in the industry that goes out there and touts that they have 4X hooks. And they have 4X hooks that they talk about fishing on light line and all this other stuff. And I said, you are absolutely out of your mind. The thing is, everyone thinks that these crazy heavy hooks are going to change their experience of what they do, and they're not going to break off. There's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be able to fish a 1X or even a 2X hook, generally speaking, and land most fish. And that's not exclusive, but I'm just making the point that listen to what Nick tells us coming up here, because the length of the barb matters, right? In terms of how easy that hook penetrates the mouth and all these things. So when you started that process, Nick, what was that like? Like, how did you even know what you were looking for in terms of what you wanted?
I guess experience from just using a variety of products that are already offered in the industry. Um,
Sure.
I personally just had liked sickle hooks in the past. I felt
Okay.
like my retention and catch rate was a bit higher with those, so I know I wanted a sickle profile. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then in terms of the cone point and designing that and the thickness of the jig, it was trying to push that upper limit of how thick we could go without, yeah, taking away from that penetration power. I mean, it's pretty crazy. So I'll get a little geeky here, but if you double the thickness of a hook, it takes double the amount of force to put that hook through the fish's mouth,
Double.
which is which is crazy. And it's not roughly. I mean, there's a little bit more math than that, but
Sure.
and it just goes exponentially up from there. So like, I don't know if you can imagine it's taking you 8 pounds to set the hook through a fish's mouth, and you double that thickness of the hook, then you're pulling at 16 pounds to set that hook through the mouth. And
Right.
it's not a perfect science. I mean, those are extrapolations from the equation, not physical testing. But
Right.
I mean, it's
But they're
interesting to look at
easy.
those
They're
numbers.
easy conceptualizations of what that
Totally,
extrapolation is from the formula.
totally. And so yeah, we wanted to get as close to that upper bound of like losing penetration with thickness and just a durable hook. I mean, you never know when you're going to hook a big fish in the rivers up here, and it's the worst feeling. I'm sure everybody's experienced losing a fish that you're just like, oh man. So yeah, we just wanted something as durable as we could get, but keeping that that penetration power.
It's such an interesting concept, right? And it's such a great idea because like I think there's a couple different reasons that I see people in the industry go and make their own hooks. Well, there's three. I'll generically say three, right? I'm sure there's a lot of more intricacies of different things, but one is they don't know what they don't even know why, and they don't know what they're talking about. So that happens. Two, they are trying to change. They're trying to get a hook that's going to fit a certain mold style that they're creating or developing. Okay, and then three is this type of process, which you won't, as Nick just described, that you won't hear a lot of people talk about often. It's not typically about how you find this balance. Because I'm going to tell you, I've listened to lots of shows and lots of people talk about why they design hooks and or they had custom hooks made, and never do they go into this type of description. But for what it's worth, he's not Nick's not selling the farm here, right? He's just saying, well, this is why we wanted to design a custom hook. But you don't hear a lot of people talk about that. So it's just interesting to think that that's some of the methodologies behind it. But I guarantee on the back end, folks, if you go and ask people that have custom hooks made, they'll go and if you ask them these questions, like Nick just talked about, they say, "Oh yeah, those are all the reasons." Absolutely not. I don't think that people conceptualize things that cerebrally that they're gonna want to talk about that much. It's for the other reasons. They want to be different. They want it to fit a custom style, and a lot of times, frankly, it's to maximize strength. And you'll get it a lot with guys that are trying to make flipping jigs and things like that that are really big fish, or it's not even big fish. It's they want to pull fish out of cover fast, right? And so that's a
Totally.
lot of the reasoning. And I just think this is interesting because keep in mind this is a company that not inherently by itself this is what the jigs are designed for, Jig Geek, but I mean this is born out of the salmon and steelhead fishing scene, which is predominantly a river based experience in many ways, right? So that's real interesting. So just so you know what you want to go for it. So, guys, just so everyone knows in chat, if anyone asks, who the hook manufacturer is of Nick's custom hooks, he's not going to be said, right? But
Yeah.
we and I knew that already because Nick and I talked about this in advance, right? But anything else along the way with what this process was like and like going to it. So basically, you know what you want, and you decide you're going to go to a manufacturer and say, "Hey, I want to make this." What was that experience like?
A lot of back and forth and a lot of relying on their expertise, for just different different processes and steps along the way, and a lot of back and forth and iteration. Can we change this? Is this possible? Can the machines achieve this? And yeah, it was just a bit of a dance going back and forth and trying to figure out the capabilities that hook machines are able to produce, and then figuring out how we could end up with that final design that would, one, be manufacturable, two, be cost effective, and then be as close to the design I had in my mind as possible. And I'm not gonna lie, I relied on their expertise a lot. And coming from a mechanical engineering background, I knew some of the stuff, whether it was like heat strength and tempering and making sure that process was done correctly, but had never designed or played with a wire bending machine before, or that whole process of how they're formed. So yeah, there's just a lot of back and forth and trying to tweak stuff. And I mean, yeah, they've produced a ton of hooks. So it's just like, hey, this is the idea. What can you take from it? And can we switch something you have a little bit and morph it into this? And it's a lot easier to go from a starting point than go from nothing at all. So yeah, that was the process, and it took a long time.
Would you say a year and a half, 2
I'd
years?
say about a year. And I mean, for various reasons, and testing it and going back and not. And yeah, we didn't have the hook when we launched Jig Geek. We didn't have the hook we have now. Actually, my very first customer, who became one of my really good friends, returned every single jig he bought and said, I can't fish these. I don't like the hook. And I won't mention whose hook we were using at that time. But yeah, that was the first sale I got, and everything came back. And that's when this process started. I got on the drawing board and was like, okay, we got to find something that isn't the norm in the industry already, and try to cut out a little niche for us that we can differentiate ourselves from what's currently on the market.
Yeah, I think that's a real good point, Nick, because a lot of times I and I'm not knocking anyone for this. Like I always like, so Nick, one of the things I do, like I tell people all the time, if you need stuff or you have an idea or you have a question, message me, and I try and reply to everyone. I'm at a point in this Jig Squad experience where I'm able to still do that, right? I have some of the time to do it. And I do. I want to see people have a good experience and make jigs to whatever extent they want to. A lot of people won't go to the next level, and I know that. But the thing is, there's sometimes people will ask and they want to get custom stuff made, and I get the desire for it. But the one thing I'll say for anyone listening is make sure that if you ever think about or tell yourself, man, I would like to make a custom jig or whatever it is, and make sure you have a reason why. So it's always to distinguish yourself from others. That's unquestionable. And I'll never argue with that point. Right. And I know that has to happen, but you also want it to serve a purpose, right? You have to know why you're wanting to do it. It's not just to look different and in theory, and you want it to serve a purpose. And if you don't need it to do something different than you already know is out there, or a mold that's already out there that you can modify yourself, then don't take the time to go and do that. You can't, you don't have to reinvent the wheel if you're not solving a problem, right? Or you're not intending to solve a problem. So, and hey, do what you want, right? I could care less. And Nick, so I don't sell jigs, right? I've been making jigs for 30 years. I don't sell my jigs. I am this year starting to do a little licensing work with a couple of companies where I design some unique colors in a jig line they already have. And then it just becomes a marketing opportunity for me too. And I like the company. But besides that, I don't sell my own jigs, and so I don't mind saying all these things to people. Sometimes people ask, like, Murph, why do you tell people all these things? I go, because I'm Jig Squad. I'm the guy that started all this, So it's such an interesting concept to me. And I'm really, I appreciate you telling that story of like why you decided to do it, because there was intent and purpose behind it. And so one of the things, you guys, listen, if you go on the Jig Geek site, one of the things that I started, and I'll be honest with you, this is how I found out about Jig Geek. one of the things I started seeing on social media over time, I didn't know who Jig Geek was. And one of the things I started seeing is I saw people tagging Jig Geek, and I'm like, why are they tagging Jig Geek? So you start looking and you start figuring things out. And I realized that his hooks are beloved by many a jig maker and a jig tire. People love his hooks, and then you can't get this jig hook anywhere else, right? And so there's a lot of people that will tie jigs using the Jig Geek blanks, right? So it's just random jigs. Like, so let me go look. I want to see. So, like, what do they call it on the site? They're called blank jigs, right?
Yep.
And so all different types of colors. Yeah, they're awesome. And so are you doing, let me ask you a question, Nick, because I always like asking about this. Are you doing all your own painting, or are you having that done out of house?
We do it in-house.
In-house. Okay. Um
Yeah, that
tell me
we, the re,
tell me about
the
that.
re,
What's your jig painting experience been like, you know?
it's yeah, without getting too much into it, it's interesting. We've tried a lot of stuff, um,
Okay.
and a lot of different types of paints. And for us, it was durability. So trying to find a paint and that formula of paint that could be durable. So
Mhm.
like the stuff in the market that you can get traditionally is good stuff. I mean, if you do it properly and you fully cross-link the polymers, it's it's hard. It's hard as rock. But I mean, there's limitations to the durability and the colors that is off the market. So I mean, we looked at other industries that have different colors and stuff, and
Sure.
tried to see like the railing industry, automotive industry. There's different industries that use different stuff, and we try to
Yeah.
morph. So like try to morph our painting design or how we paint and get inspiration from those different industries to do it. So it's done in house. I hate painting.
You hate what?
I hate the
Baking?
painting process.
The
Yeah,
painting process.
for sure.
That's why I
Um,
wanted to ask about it, because I mean, there's other people that say that. They're like, they hate the painting process. And the thing is, for you, I guess it's because you're a company, right? So, like,
yeah,
there's a volume to things that makes you want to hate plenty of things, right? And that,
yeah,
I think that's what it becomes, right?
yeah. It becomes it's a volume thing for sure, and it's also just keeping track of the colors or changing stuff over. A couple colors use different methods, so it's switching setups. It's yeah, it's just the most time consuming part of the production process.
Yeah.
Um, and
Interesting.
it's the and to me it's like the I mean everybody can pour lead on a jig hook, and not
Right.
everybody can make a durable paint, or a paint that lasts, because I don't know, when you're fishing a jig, I mean at the end of the day, does it matter if there's a chip on the jig? Probably not. But from the fisherman's perspective, I mean, yeah, you feel a little bit more confident when you got all the paint left on your jig and you're like, yeah, the fish are gonna like the color
Right.
of this one. So
Right.
I mean, yeah, tried to figure out a way and processes to get that as hard as possible. And I mean, you there's just some colors that you just can't. There's too many chemicals in them, and you try to get them as hard as you can, and just because the color needs to be a certain way, you can't get them as hard as say like a black or a white.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's the paint game. I mean, the other thing is like making sure that you don't have filled eyes. I mean, I
Oh
hate
my
pulling a
God.
pack of jigs off a shelf at the store and having to take another jig hook and you just dulled the shit out of the tip because you had to punch the eye out.
Nick,
I mean, we wanted, yeah,
I kid you not, dude. Listen, so I about 4 times in the past week, and like I said, I'm not a name dropper. I don't like doing that, right? It's just not my game. But I decided that sometimes I got to talk a little smack, but I don't want to, I don't want to name people. Like, I don't know. I'm not that. That's not how I do things, right? So I about 4 times, 3, 4 times in the past week, I almost posted on my story on Instagram, and I wanted to say, if you were selling a $7 jig and you are selling it with painted over eyes, you should stop selling. And you guys, I'm sorry if you're watching this on replay and that's your jam and that's how you do things. I'll just say it. I mean, you should not be selling jigs. You can't. I don't expect, there's all different types of jig makers out there and all different types of things. But when you're selling, man, you got to class it up a little bit. You can't be selling a jig with a painted over eye. Are you kidding me? And this is a custom jig maker, right? This isn't like a big company that manufactures like Target or Walmart little ball head jigs. This was like somebody billing themselves as like a high-end custom jig maker. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, you know what, man, class it up,
Yeah.
and I'm just saying, and the thing is, if you don't want to do that, if you make them for yourself and you want to do it, but you know what, Nick, here's one more thing. This past week, so I work at a high school, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tuesday, I brought my pot in, and I brought all my stuff in, and we were making Arky style flipping jigs for the kids on the bass team, right? That the coaches asked me, they're like, Murph, will you do this with the kids? This is the second time we did it this winter. And I bring them in, I bring all my stuff, I bring all my paint, not all my paint. I keep it simple. I make little cups for them, their own little cups in a couple different colors, black, and they're all bass kids, right? Black, white, chartreuse, and green pumpkin. And they all have their stuff, but I taught them all. The first thing I taught them is how to make sure that you have clean eyes. And every jig that left that room on Tuesday, every jig didn't have a lick of paint in the eyes. And these kids never made a jig in their lives. But I'm like, there is not a chance. And I'm sending these kids out with skirted jigs with paint in the eyes. Because you take a new jig maker and they dunk it in and you're thinking, oh my gosh, how's this going to go? But I taught them how to make sure the paint was aerated. I did all the stuff with them. I had them putting heat shrink on the eyes. I mean, just because it's small batch stuff. And all these kids walked out of there with no paint in their eyes. I'm like, that's that $7 jig maker. I should send them. But anyway, like, you got to class it up, dude. It's like you're running a business. Like, especially if you're a company, you got to class it up. No paint in your eyes. Can't do
Totally.
that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're poking paint out, I mean, powder paint specifically, if you're cracking powder paint, you're breaking the polymer chain and it's going to propagate.
That is a great comment, because once you crack it, it's whatever paint you pop out is extending right down to that jig. I'm going to say a ball head, right? Yep. And guess what? You've started the process. That thing's going to chip the first time it hits anything. So keep that in mind. If you're a jig maker and you can make a jig without painting the eyes, popping it out later is not going to help. It's going to chip faster, All right, Nick, here's a good question. So on Murtha Tackle, Evan Luda, he says, do you think a sickle hook works with a weedless jig, or do you think you need a full gap? What's your thoughts?
I'm assuming that's for bass fishing. It
is a bad. I have a comment on this, but I want to see what you say.
Zero experience in that. I know what a bass is. I like big mouth, big gap. Maybe. I've never fished it, and I don't know. Like, I don't even know this. I know like some of the styles, but like,
yeah.
I mean, what's the point of a wide gap hook for bass fishing? So you get more mouth coverage, more bite distance. So would a sickle hook work? Yeah, possibly if it's a hook and where like the sickle hook in terms of the shape of it. And the reason I like them is because where the fish sits in the point, I feel like it has a harder time coming off the hook. So you can get a sickle hook in a wider gap. There's manufacturers out there. So would it retain the bass a little bit more? Potentially. Is it going to affect your hookup ratio because you don't have a wide gap? Maybe. Honestly, I can't really speak to that because I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, here's my answer, bud. And you probably could guess what my answer is going to be on this. So first of all, there are some people that will make bass jigs with a sickle or an O'Shaughnessy bend. And the whole function, I truly believe that if you looked at the hook gap on that sickle styled hook, and actually the Jig Geek one is pretty good. It's not scaled down, but a lot of sickle style, I don't think that they're too far off from some other average typical sized hook gaps. The only difference between a sickle cell, and I'm going to say O'Shaughnessy too, but I do think a sickle cell is better than an O'Shaughnessy. A sickle cell does what an O'Shaughnessy wants to do. That's what I'm going to say. And what I mean by that is the only function of that, just because you have a weed guard, it's not going to change it any more than you would if you had a round bend. But the sickle cell is going to change pinning that fish once you hook them. Once it gets down in once it gets down in that gap, right? It's caught. There's less of a movement point, right? And the O'Shaughnessy hook tries to do that same concept by rounding off one side of the round bend. Okay. But what the sickle cell does is takes an angle at it and says, forget your rounding or narrowing it off a little bit. I'm just going to go right over and create that V almost. And that's why that fish is going to get hooked. There's guys, to be honest with you, Evan, or anyone else out there, I know guys, there's a lot of people in the salmon world and coho world that's all they'll use. And I also know there's a couple of guys in the bass world that are converting over almost exclusively to all sickle cell. I'm going to be honest with you. I say this, and I've said it hundreds of times on the show. I still haven't converted over yet. Why? I don't know. I don't know why. I should. Yeah. But I will say with fidelity, I 100% believe in the concept behind the sickle cell or O'Shaughnessy styled hook is being superior to a round bend hook. I do. And I can't tell you why I haven't converted over yet. I'm kind of an old school guy. I like mono once in a while too, you know, like I don't switch over. I have my things I like, and that's what it is. But I do believe in the science behind, you know, you get a fish in this small, thin membrane on a fish or the lip, and you're going to hook that fish. Well, guess what? The more I have to swing around, the more likely you're going to expand the gap, and that you're going to lose that fish. If it's a narrower V point where that comes in on that sickle cell, you're going to lock them up better. You're not going to open the hook gap as much, or excuse me, the mouth gap as much as to where the penetration was. I can't see a fault of it at all. So I don't know, anything to add to that on the sickle? You kind of said it yourself.
Yeah. I mean, like the only other thing to add would be like the bending out of a sickle. I mean, if you look at like torque arms, it's harder to straighten this sickle hook than it would be a round bend hook, just because where the forces go through when you put pressure. I'm not going to do it because I'll put through my finger up through that point. And that's just math.
Explain that physics, man.
Yeah, you have a torque arm.
The torque is going to change because there's two separate points on that bend.
The torque arm is going to be a lot closer to the point.
I got you.
Compared to where the fish is, or the V bend is. Where if the round one, that torque arm is going to be farther away, so you get more force or more leverage that little distance to that arc of the circle than you would to this, just because that's a closer distance. I mean, torque, it's force times distance. So that wider distance increases the torque on a round bend hook and makes it easier to straighten that loop out. Now, it could be negligible, but I don't know. I like to geek about hooks and stuff. So that went through my head when I was going back and forth and choosing stuff.
Do you see what he said here, Nick? Evan made a comment. He goes, so Evan has a small jig company, and he goes, I actually make a hook with a sickle styled hook or a jig. And he basically wanted to hear your opinion. And then he says, yeah. That's what I wanted to hear. So that's good. You know, interesting. So Jay asked, Jay is a jig maker, lots of fantastic walleye jigs, you guys. So if you're not following Jay is Outdoorsy on Instagram, you should be. Jay says, is it the angle difference affects the leverage of the fish has to throw the hook? So, but yes. So does the angle difference change the effects of leverage and the fish's ability to throw the hook?
Yeah, I would say it does.
I mean, think
the
so.
Angle, yeah, I guess so. The angle, if you take this and you put this next to a round bend hook, like that bottom part of that hook's going to match up pretty well with the round bend. The part that's going to change is this. So are they going to have the same leverage point from where they would be pinned.
Show that again, Nick. Point to those parts again as you described that.
Yeah, so
that was a real good point.
If you match a round bend hook, it's gonna be pretty similar to line up around here. The part that's gonna change is this end part. So would the leverage be the same? Potentially, but like if you got fish pinned hair and your leverage point to the line or for them to twist that, it's going to be pretty much the same with the round bend because they're sitting in roughly the same area. But with the round bend hook, that fish is going to have the ability to slide up here more or slide down here more and change that leverage or widen the gap of the hook penetration hole and spit the hook. So yeah.
Tim says the O'Shaughnessy. Tim said the O'Shaughnessy is like the sickle hook light. It's like it's trying to make a commitment to narrowing that angle down, but then it doesn't it just kind of rounds it off a little bit, you know. It's such an interesting discussion, you know. And what's funny is, Nick, I couldn't for the life of me, bud, I don't think I could say, I don't know why I haven't switched over. I just I don't know why. I honestly think it's a comfort thing for what I've been used to, but like I maybe what I'm gonna do, I think I'm gonna say right here and now, and I'll prove it because I'll post some stuff on Instagram. I think that I am gonna make some things with a sickle styled hook before the end of the winter that I'm gonna use for this spring and summer. There you go. There's only one way to switch is when you get in there and go, you know.
Yeah.
Should I make a new design shirt with a sickle on there? I'm probably gonna have to do something different, maybe just for the sickle guys out there.
Yeah, and you'll get some guys that love the round bends and they don't want to switch over and they like it and it works for them and it's confidence in your presentation. If they're happy with it and like don't fix what's not broken, if you have confidence in your presentation, I think that's more important than figuring out what hook you like. Yeah.
If now let me ask you this, Nick. If people all right, so you're in Canada, and we know how the shipping game goes. What is the process like? Are you shipping to the States? Are you not shipping to the States?
Yeah.
We
ship to the States. Yep, ship to the States all over. We've had East Coast, West Coast. Yeah.
Okay.
Where it's pretty good. It's long. I wish I could ship stuff faster to the States, but the time in transit is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But yeah, we ship all over.
Super cool. Tell me about some of the things that you make that you want to make sure you get to highlight tonight and talk about, because I know you got some stuff in front of you. What type of stuff do you want to highlight that I didn't ask about, or things like that? Because I know there's a lot. I know you got a lot of cool stuff.
I mean, I think just another thing for anybody that we could talk about colors and water conditions, fish species, daylight, and I mean, if you look on the site, we got 21, 30 different, I don't know, somewhere in there, different colors. And we get asked a lot, like, how do you know what to throw? Like,
yeah, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. All right, we're going to say semi-stained water. Current is slightly above average. River. What are you, a slightly stained water, average current?
Average current. Well, I mean, like, for me, choosing the weight would be current and depth, but in terms of color, it doesn't play much. But time. So, what time of day? Morning or night or midday?
Let's go. Morning.
Morning. I'd probably go a bit darker. Typically, in low light conditions, such as like morning or night, it's like darker colors, black, purples, dark blues. Usually a bit of flash in there to help attract something, but you don't have much light going through the water, so usually a glow head, something you can charge up. The jig has some UV properties, maybe, but yeah, early morning, bit colored water. I'd typically throw something dark, and then as the day goes on and progresses, maybe you got high sun, water clears up a bit, I'll switch to more of the lighter colors. So like whites, yellows, chartreuses, pinks, something a bit more vibrant. But yeah, usually like dusk to evening or dawn to dusk, like those two ends of the day, I'm going a bit darker, at least for salmon. And then midday when the sun's high or the water's a bit clear, yeah, the brighter stuff. And then like you'll have days where the water is crystal clear, and I'll go to more natural patterns like the Slabosaurus Rex, like our olive pattern. Um, Whether that's like more olives, more like green and blacks, stuff that is just a bit more natural. And then it changes for species for us. So like, and river system's huge. So like,
Mm-hmm.
I know we get, it seems around here, the kings love like the greens, the brighter colors, the oranges, the pinks. Whereas the coho tend to like the lighter jigs. And then you go to one river and the coho won't eat anything but purple and pink and blue and black. And so I think it's having a variety that you can pull from is nice, because then you can dial in depending on the system you're in and the conditions, whether it's murky water, clear water, high sun, low sun, overcast, time of day. So that's kind of the reason why we offer so many patterns, is because you can dial in, try to find out exactly what works for you. And if you don't have that array of stuff, well, maybe you're missing out on fish because you don't have a pattern or a color that they're biting that time of day. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of it.
Nick, let me ask you this. What's for a river coho or salmon fisherman, what is the typical knot connection on the jig? And let me ask you why I'm asking that. I'm trying to start being more inquire more when I talk to people on the show about the difference between cinch down knot styles and then loop knots is what I'm basically getting at. So keep that in mind with that question. Like
Yeah, yeah.
what's the predominant technique in terms of how a jig is fished?
So it's going to differ between a twitching jig and a float jig.
Okay.
So typically I tie my like a loop knot, like a repeller knot. So you do have
Mm-hmm.
that extra action in the knot for it to work. Typically on here you'll see like a 4-foot fluorocarbon monofilament leader to
Okay.
braid, just to absorb some of the shock and then, I mean, disappear underwater. And then with the float jigs, you'll often see a cinch knot. And the reason you'll see a cinch knot
Okay.
is because you can slide that line up to the point of the jig, and you can keep that jig cinched and floating horizontal. So if you put a
I got
repellent
you.
on this would float down like that, where you want to keep that floating that way.
Got you.
And that helps with hookups and presentation. But yeah, so 2 different types of knots for 2 different styles of jig. And you'll get some guys that will still tie clinch knots on these, and it works fine. I mean, you typically have enough movement just with the drop of the jig that you don't necessarily need that extra wiggle. But typically I tie a repeller knot and then a cinch knot on these ones, whether it's like an improved clinch or I don't know. I got some knots I don't even know the name of. I got taught them when I was
Right.
young and have never cared to look up what type of knot it is.
I know. Same thing. I honestly think, Nick, I keep thinking this all the time, and I'm glad I asked that question because about the knot that gets used. And I sometimes people are more concerned about like things. I mean, at least in the bass end, like people talking about FG knots and Alberto knots and everything else. But the reason I'm going to start asking this more is because I'm going to make a big push as this year continues on for more people to be considerate. Not whatever people ain't got to listen to me, but I'm making the point that I think we need to be more thoughtful in the way we fish jigs and whether we're going to use loop knots or, in some of our fishing. And I'll tell you why I think this, because if you talk to the saltwater guys, is they're casting jigs, that's all. If they're not using like a tactical angler clip or something like that, they're using loop knots and everything else. And the reason they use it is to increase the action on their jigs, right? And so it just blows my mind that in the bass world, no one uses them. They don't. And anyone that tells me that they do in the bass world, I call nonsense half the time. Maybe some clear water smallmouth guys do sometimes, but most of the time I know they don't. And I just think it's real interesting because you gave a perfect example of differentiating between how to keep your jig, you know, I guess we would call it horizontal, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't
Yeah.
want it to go vertical. And it's such an interesting concept of how people could change what their jig looks like by doing that. But I don't think across all species of fish people are considered of that knot style. So I just think it's an interesting concept. And I did have a hunch that you were gonna answer some type of way similar to what you did. So that's why I threw that one out there.
Totally.
So Matt says this, very interesting. He goes, Matt's a South Jersey fisherman. Matt, he's big into the JDM scene, and he says a lot of the JDM guys have been using snaps on jigs, and they were smacking them. If you talk to a bucktail jig fisherman from the East Coast, they almost exclusively use tactical angler clips. If you go down to Florida and talk to a surf casting fishermen, they'll tell you about how they're using a loop knot when they're chasing after redfish and snook and trout. So the thing is, it's just one of those things, but I just see the value in it in a lot of different water conditions. And I mean, look at On the Fly. He just says, he goes, your knot has to change based on the lure being used and how you were fishing it. It's critical to the presentation. Yeah, absolutely, Bri. Just like Nick was saying about like that float jig, like he wants that to stay horizontal. And if he tied a loop knot, it was gonna back end on him, right? So I just think it's pretty interesting. JP Harrell's saying, yeah, I was wondering the same thing. Loop knots are huge in the saltwater world and not so much in the freshwater bass world. So JP, I'm going to throw one more out there besides that, just the loop. Look at what Nick's talking about. And you hear some of the coho and river salmon guys talking about regarding some type of looped jig, right? Where you're able to change your hook out. How great is that? Why aren't we doing more of that where we change our hooks out? So Nick, this is the type of stuff I'm talking about where it's like, it doesn't matter what you're fishing for. Like there are applications that just are so practical and make sense to me. And I just wonder, I wonder, and I'm like, why aren't more people doing this in this type of fishing for this type of species and not? And I mean, I'll say this, the United States is heavily a bunch of bass heads fishermen to a lot of degrees, right? And when it comes to jigs, don't get me wrong, guys. I don't want to disrespect the East Coast boys, the South boys, everything else. But at the end of the day, everyone wants a bigger wire hook, want to slam it through they want to use 80-pound braid. And I'm done listening to everyone talk that's the way you have to fish, And I don't know. People may think Mike Murphy from Jig Squad's the crackpot. Well, no, I'm not. I'm just saying that there's other ways to fish, and I think people should be considerate and think of these things because I think they're going to put more fish to hand by trying some different techniques. I don't think we have to replicate everything Nick's telling us what he's talking about. But man, go look at his jigs. You're telling me if you're a bass guy, you're telling, first of all, half of his colors would work for bass too. But you're telling me you couldn't, if you're a jig maker, you couldn't sit there and say, hey, look at that style jig. I think I should consider how that might impact my experience jig making. Well, think about it. You guys, Nick is so well respected in the social media scene. There's, like I told you, there's a ton of jig makers or just fishermen that use his stuff, and they might just be tires, but they're buying his jigs, right? Why? Because it's something unique. There's thoughtfulness behind it, and he tells a story. What the heck? I mean, how can you go wrong with that? Nick, I really appreciate it, man. What else? Anything else we didn't cover that we want to make sure we get to?
No, I don't think so. I think we did a pretty good job covering everything. I mean, yeah, we got some new products coming out soon, which I'm super excited about.
Are you telling more about what those are or anything like that, or hinting at anything?
I don't. We're trying to save those for a launch date. But maybe we'll jump back on here and go over those because they're.
I would love to have you on again. When are you thinking of launching some of the new stuff, buddy?
March, early March.
Oh, so it's coming.
Oh yeah, we're in scramble mode right now, trying to figure it all out.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I think we covered it. Pardon?
That's awesome, dude. So what we'll do is, and I can even, like, I'm going to add one of the things I'm going to do, Nick, is as the year goes on, I'm going to add some other nights for shows. Like once in a while, I'm going to do I'll call them Saturday Night Lights, and just some other nights for shows and just extras to get people on other times to just hang out and BS and talk, you know.
Totally.
And one of the things I'm thinking of doing, which I think might be cool if you're even interested down the line, is doing a night where I get like four other jig makers on, and like I ask a question and just encourage the debate to happen.
Yeah, yeah.
As to what I think it would be kind of fun to hear people debate why they agree or disagree with some different things. I think it would be kind of fun. So, but I would love to have you on again. I appreciate your company tremendously, bud. You guys, I want to make sure you support Jig Geek. The links are all down below. You know, whether you're a designer or you just like jigs, you should go check it out. A lot of cool stuff. Should give you ideas, or even to go purchase blank jigs if you're looking to, you know, have some quality jigs to tie on for yourself. But this is Jig Squad. Nick, hang around and chat when we end this. We'll be in the back room after we end this. But guys, Jig Geek live on Jig Squad. Whether you're live right now, you guys, I appreciate you all. We're gonna be back in 2 weeks again. I don't know who's up next. I have to look, but we got shows are booked until June. And in the next month or so, there's gonna be some exciting Jig Squad news coming up again, too, that I'm not gonna lead on to yet, but just some new things coming. But guys, I appreciate you all. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Nick and I are out. So peace, folks. Be good to each other. Let's roll the outro. Let's see. Where am I going to get the roll? It doesn't want to roll for me. Maybe it will. Let's try it again. There we go. Peace, folks. We're out.
Have a good one, guys.